Okay, so we're not really liking that while true loop, and we kind of want to have a better way of shutting down our application. So we are going to create a consumer demo, but in this one, we're basically going to do and with threads. So we'll have a thread, and we'll basically have our consumer in a thread. Now, this is going to be a bit of a more advanced type of section. So if you're not familiar with threads, I'm sorry, like this is going to be just up one notch. So we'll create a group ID and we'll call it my 6th application. And here in the consumer configs, I can leave it just as is. And we'll just change the Kafka consumer and so on. So what I have to do is basically create a new class for my Kafka consumer. And this is the class that is going to do everything I need to do. So we'll call it public class consumer thread. Okay, and it extends a runnable. And so when you have this extends runnable, you need to implement the methods. And so we'll do implement methods. And the one method we need to implement is run. And so the runnable implements run. By the way, it's not extends, it's implements in Java, okay? At top of run, we'll have a function called shutdown, which is going to shut down our consumer thread, okay? And finally, we'll also have a constructor for our consumer thread. So consumer thread right here, and it's going to take a latch, a countdown latch. And this is something in Java to deal with concurrency. So for now, just bear with me. We're going to create a latch inside our consumer thread. And here we'll say this.latch equals latch. This one is private. Okay, so basically we create a consumer thread and we pass on a latch, and this latch is going to be able to shut down our application correctly. Okay, so in our consumer thread, basically our consumer consumes. And so in there, I can still have my while true loop. And so here we go, we can just put it from here, the while true loop. Now, as you can see, it's not perfect code. This is because we're missing a few things. And so one thing we're missing is this consumer. So we can create that consumer directly in there. So we'll have a private Kafka consumer string, call it consumer. And we are going to initialize it here. So we'll do consumer equals this. So let's go ahead and say consumer equals new Kafka consumer and the properties, and then we'll need to subscribe to the topic. So for this, we'll also have a string topic as an argument, and the properties, let's just say we're just going to create them directly in there. So right now, this is just a bit of refactoring of my code. We can pass as well a few things. We can pass string bootstrap servers, and we can pass string group ID and string topic. So here we have a consumer threads, and basically we pass in a latch, a bootstrap servers, group ID, and topic. I like to have the latch just last, okay? So here we go. This is a good start. And basically, what we are going to do when we shut down everything is we're going to do consumer.wakeup. Now, the wakeup method is a special method to interrupt .pull, consumer.pull. And it's going to make it come up with an exception. It will throw the exception, and the exception is called wake up exception. So let's go have a look at what this does. Basically, we're going to have a try right here and say we're going to try to do these things. Now, if you have an exception, and we're going to catch an exception called the wake up exception. If you catch this exception, then we're just going to have a logger. So let's just create our logger while we're at it. We'll create this logger and we'll put it right here. And this logger is going to be a consumer thread logger. Okay. So we have our private logger right here. And so this logger is going to say info received shutdown signal. And so this says, okay, now I received the shutdown signal, so I'm out of this while loop, and you can do whatever you want in here as well. but we don't need to print that exception because it's an expected exception. And then finally, super important, what we do is that we're going to close our consumer. So consumer dot close, super important to close our consumer when we're done. And then latch dot countdown. And this is going to allow our main code to understand that we should be able to exit. So tell our main code, we're done with the consumer by doing latch.countdown. Okay, so this is a bit more complicated. We have a shutdown, which will throw an exception. The exception just comes here, and then we receive the shutdown signal. We close the consumer, and then we count down. Okay, so a fair bit of things, but this looks all right. And now our code is going to become super simple. We'll say runnable, my consumer, thread is equals to new consumer thread. And here we pass in Bootstrap servers, the group ID, the topic, and we need to pass in a countdown latch. So we'll create it. Countdown latch equals new countdown latch, and you just pass in a value of 1. And we'll just pass in this latch. So this is good. Okay, this looks appropriate. And it says this cannot be referenced from a static context. So for now, what we have to do is basically move this out. So to move it out, what I'm going to do is create a class. I'll do public class, consumer demo with thread. And this is just something basic, okay? This is actually not a public class, it's just public. Here we go. And in there, I'm going to place my code, and I'm going to create a run method, public void run. Here we go. This is our full method, and now we're good. We should be able to do things we need. So we'll say new consumer demo with thread dot run, and this will start our program. So a bit more convoluted, a bit more complicated, and we can make this private. So I'll make this private and also make this private. But we have now a way to create an object consumer demo with thread, launch the run function. The run function is here. It creates a logger, and then it creates a latch. So here we'll say logger.info creating the consumer thread. Here we have a runnable, which is my consumer thread. And now we have to do stuff with that consumer thread. So now we can do thread, my thread equals new thread, and we pass in the runnable. So my consumer thread. We can actually rename this to my consumer runnable. And we can actually rename this class to be exactly correct, to consumer runnable. Okay, so here we go. We have my consumer runnable. And then we can do my thread dot start. Now we don't want our application to exit right away. So we'll do latch dot, and here we say await. And this basically makes us wait all the way until the application is over. I'll surround it with try catch to print the stack trace. And then finally, I'll say logger.info application is closing. And here we'll say logger.error application got interrupted, and we'll pass in the E exception. So here we have latch.await, application is closing, and then application got interrupted. Finally, the last thing we should do is add a shutdown hook to basically properly shut down our application. So this is start the thread. Here we create the consumer runnable. Okay. Here is a latch for dealing with multiple threads. And then finally, we create a shutdown hook. So we do runtime dot get runtime dot add shutdown hook, new thread. And here's the trick. In that thread, we're going to create a function. So we do parenthesis, an arrow like this, and then we open up the curly braces. This is Java 8 style of programming. It's called lambda functions. And we'll do logger.info cut shutdown hook. And then finally, we'll do my consumer runnable dot shutdown. And so this is it. We'll do my consumer runnable dot shutdown, and that should give us the ability to shut down our consumer. So hopefully everything is going to work right now. So let's try it out. A little bit of good. So let's go ahead and try it out. So I press play here, and well, our application is starting, so it has starting to read some data. So happy days, at least this is working. But what we are interested in is when our application stops. So I'm going to clear the log so it's empty. And now to clean the application and shut down gracefully, we click on exits. And so we see cut shutdown hook, and then it says received shutdown signal. And then I realized that our application still hasn't really properly shut down, because in here, we need to add a latch.await as well. And we'll just surround it with try catch. Okay, so this looks good now. Here we await the application, and then logger.info, application has exited. Okay, so now let's try again. Basically, we'll make sure that this doesn't exist too quickly. So here we go, we have our consumer. I'm going to clean the log, click on here to exit, and here we go. So we get cut shutdown hook, receive shutdown signal, application is closing, and application has exited, and that's it. So now you understand that this lecture was a bit difficult. It has to do with threading programming. It's a bit more advanced. There's way more lines. We wrote about 120 lines of code. This is a bit more complicated, but this is more advanced. But just use this as a framework to making your applications work, and you'll get something that works just fine, okay? So that's about it for this lecture. In the next lecture, we'll see one last method to deal with consumers.